We've had 20 years of growth. Whew. Man, let's take a break. But not only that, here's the biggest challenge. When you start a brand new church, you have a clear vision of what you want to do. You start talking to people and you say, I have a vision of starting a new work for God in this community. And we want to reach out and touch people's lives, and we want to win them to faith in Christ. And I want to start ministries for children and ministries for this and ministries for that. And you have this clear vision of what you want to do. And you talk about it all the time because you're excited about it. Well, by the time you get up there to the 20th year, you have accomplished your vision. You've done it. And you know the big mistake of most churches is? They don't get a new vision. They've accomplished the old vision, but there's no new vision to provide the energy to move forward. Here's an insight. Are you having trouble getting people to give their money to you? Are you having trouble getting people to volunteer in your ministries? I'll tell you, the issue is you don't have vision. Because people give money to vision, and they give volunteer time to vision. And if they're excited about the future of the church and what the church is going to do, then they volunteer, and then they give money, and then they participate, because that's what draws them there. When my wife and I, a few years ago, we had never been to Hawaii, and we wanted to go to Hawaii. So we had this vision of going to Hawaii. And you know what we did? We saved our money. And we were happy to save our money because we had a vision of saving our money and going to Hawaii. And so we sacrificed and we put money away, and we didn't do other things that we normally would do so we could have money to go to Hawaii. And it was the vision of going to Hawaii that caused us to sacrifice and to do the things we needed to get there. And that's the same thing in a church. If your people aren't giving money, you don't have a financial problem, you have a vision problem. If your people aren't serving and volunteering, you don't have a volunteer problem, you have a vision problem. And you've got to get a hold of this. What is happening is you haven't given your people a vision to give money to. You haven't given them a vision to volunteer for. But in a new church, you've got that in a new church. And that's why new churches grow. And you can look around Manila. I know at least there's a couple of churches that I've heard about that are fairly new churches, and they've grown tremendously. But see, they're new churches. And when they're new churches, they got a clear vision. But then you get up here to that peak, and you've accomplished it. And then there's nothing else to do. And we cease talking about the future. We cease talking about the vision. And slowly but surely, we get onto a plateau. And people begin to give a little bit less. They begin to volunteer less. They are a little bit less excited about the church. And we get onto that plateau. So we move into that third phase, which I call the consolidating phase. Now, the reason why I call it the consolidating phase, because what you're doing is you're consolidating all your victories in the first 20 years. You're consolidating all your wins, so to speak. And you're resting. Now, the church just doesn't begin to die. And here's why. Let me give you an illustration. If you ever go on a cruise ship, just imagine in your mind, you got these big ships out in the ocean, like a cruise ship, or maybe some sort of an oil tanker or something like that. But you got this huge ship. Imagine that huge ship has got its motors running at top speed, and it's going through the water as fast as it can. And all of a sudden, the captain of the ship says, "Turn the motors off." And so the person turns all the motors off. Let me ask you a question. Does that big ship stop going? Does it? Yes or no? No, it doesn't. Because it's got all this momentum. And you turn the motors off, well, you got all this weight in that cruise ship or that ocean liner, and it just keeps going. Because it's got all this pent-up energy Keeps going. But what happens is that ever so slowly, the water is hitting the hull of the ship and providing resistance. Ever so slowly, the wind is blowing against the ship and providing resistance. And what happens is that ever so slowly, that ship is slowing down. And if we don't turn the engine back on, eventually that ship is just going to stop and be sitting in the ocean and just floating at the whim of the waves, the currents, and the water hitting against the hull. Now, think of that in terms of a church. Here's what's happening. Down here, the engines of the church are going full blast, and the church is going. And then you get up here, and you don't replace your accomplished vision with a new vision, and everybody in the church says, well, let's just enjoy the fruit of our labors, and they relax. Well, the church keeps going. The ministries keep functioning. It's like that cruise ship. There's a lot of energy moving, but ever so slowly, the church is slowing down, and we don't even know it because we're up on top of the ship, and we're playing basketball, and we're drinking and eating, and we're talking and having fun. But ever so slowly, the ship's slowing down. We don't even notice it. But what happens is, gradually the ship slows down, and around the 50th year, the church comes to a dead stop. Now, it could be the 40th year, could be the 45th year, could be the 60th year. It depends. Every church is different, just like every human being is different. As people age, some people have more energy when they're 70, and some people have more energy, when they're 60, and less energy when they're 70. Everybody's different. Every church is different. But in general, what happens is a church begins to lose energy, and what happens is then the church begins to decline. So you move into the declining church. Somewhere around the 50th year, and again, that could be 40th to maybe 60th year, somewhere in there, the church will begin to decline. And the church begins to find it more difficult to get people to give money, more difficult to support their missionaries, more difficult to do evangelism in the community, more difficult to get volunteers in the church, because the church begins to lose people, and it begins to decline. And if it declines enough, then the church will get to a point where it dies. And the way a church dies, there's two ways a church dies. One, it actually closes and there's no ministry function at all. Or the other way is that a church gets so small that it's just surviving, and it does not have any real spiritual impact anymore, even though the people are still there and the church still meets. But the truth is, it doesn't have much impact. Now, you're on the back side of this when people start saying, I remember when. So if people in your church are saying things like, I remember when the worship auditorium was full, how come it's not full today? Or I remember when we used to have a lot of younger people in the church, and now we don't have many younger people in the church. Or I remember when the nursery at the church was full of babies, and now we don't have hardly any babies. When the people in the church start looking to the past, then what that means is that they don't have any vision for the future right now. Because every church has to be proud of itself. You have to have a way of feeling good about yourself. And when a church gets older, the way a church feels good about itself when it's older is by looking to its past. When it was healthier, when it was stronger, when it was thriving, when it was more dynamic. Well, what I want you to do is take a moment to see yourself. So if you go over to page 12, I would like for you to take a few minutes here. We're going to do it. I want you to read these statements. Think about your church. Think about the church that you're attending right now as you read these statements. For each one of these statements, circle either strongly agree, uncertain, disagree, or strongly disagree. All right, so like on the first question, our church's mission, our purpose, our vision, and values are clear to everyone who attends the church. So if you agree with that, if you strongly agree with that, you would circle SA. If you think that it's kind of true, you would circle A. If you're not sure, circle the U. Now, if you disagree, if you feel like your vision is not very clear, then circle D for disagree. Or if you really feel that the vision isn't clear, circle SD. All right? So I'm going to give you a few minutes here to go through this. There's 2 pages here. All right? So each one of you, think of the church you're in, read the statement. There is no right or wrong answer here. This is just a little tool to help you identify where your church is on the life cycle. So get started. Read it. If you don't understand the question, just circle U. Okay? There may be some questions that maybe you don't understand, so just circle U for uncertain. But for most of them, try and circle agree or disagree to the question. Again, thinking about your particular church. So we're going to give you just a few minutes to do that. And then we're going to see where your church is on its life cycle. So this is a working session. All right, hopefully you're down to number 4 or 5 by now. I hope so. Again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's just simply your feelings, your opinion about how you understand your church that you're attending right now. So just take a few minutes and circle strongly agree, uncertain, disagree, or strongly disagree. Hopefully you're down maybe to 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 on the questionnaire. Again, if you are uncertain about a question, what it means, just circle the U for uncertain. Hopefully we're getting down towards the end of the first page, number 15 or so. I see some of you are already on page 2. When you get to page 2, then add up the ones that you circled in each column and put the number underneath the SA, the A, the U, the D, or the SD. Some of you are already doing that. I know that you've done these kind of surveys before. And when you have tallied all of them up, then you multiply them times 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 as indicated on page 13. And you'll get a total number. Add the totals up And then go over to page 14. And as closely as you can, put an X on the life cycle on the top of page 14, very similar to what I have up on the screen, as to where the total points would fall from your questionnaire. I think most of you are understanding what I'm talking about. If you look around, you see somebody that doesn't really understand, help them out a little bit. But you'll get a total number, and then put an X on the top of page 14, as near as you can guess to where that X would go based on that number. That will give you an estimate of where you feel your church is on the life cycle. Now, when you're done, turn to somebody beside you and share with them where you think your church is on the life cycle. Okay, so it's okay to talk. Turn to somebody, talk to them, and share with them where you think your church is on its life cycle. We'll take just a few minutes. Okay, good. I hear a lot of conversation. That's good. Now, this should either make you happy or make you sad. Happy, that's good. Or concerned, or whatever. What you can do if you really want to get a better perspective is you can actually ask other people in the church to take the same survey and then take their tallied numbers and average them out and get a picture of where your church is on the life cycle. Okay, well, let's come on back. Let's go back to page 14. On page 14, number 3, what's really happening in the life cycle? Let's talk about the life cycle for just a minute. Number 3 on page 14. What we typically discover is when you look at the life cycle of a church, the first half of the life cycle is the growth years of the church. And the last half of the life cycle are the declining years of the church. So what's really happening? In the first part of the life cycle, what's happening is that we're seeing people who are coming to the church through conversion growth. That is, they are coming to faith in Jesus Christ out of the world and being baptized and becoming a part of the church. And then we see that some people are transferring in. Because when you have a new growing church, there's such an excitement that other people in the community will be attracted to that church. Now, the pastors aren't trying to steal people from other churches. It's just that when you've got a new church and it's exciting, other people will tend to be attracted and they'll transfer their membership or their attendance to that particular church. And then what happens is that people in that church typically are younger, and the church has a lot of babies that are born in the church. So the church grows because it is winning people to faith in Christ from the world. It is attracting new people to the church from other churches. And it's having its own children born in the church. And they grow up in the church. They receive Christ. They're baptized. They become a part of that particular church. And the church grows. Now, when the church is in the decline years, the opposite happens. In the decline years, the church begins to lose people. It loses people to death. God calls some people to go home and be with him. And so we lose people to just the natural death in the church. And then you have people who revert from their faith. As you know, unfortunately and sadly, some people who once named the name of Christ have walked away from Christ. And they don't participate in church anymore, and they don't serve him, and they don't attend. And we see them as slipping away from the church. And then, of course, we have people who transfer out. We begin to see people who leave our church to attend other churches in the future, in the community. So what happens is you have both of these things happening at the same time. In every one of our churches, you have people who are being won to the Lord, and people who are being born in our church and raised in the church, and you have people who transfer in. And at the exact same time, you have people who pass away, people who drift away from the church, and you have people who